November 23, 1942. Stalingrad. Generaloberst Kurt Zeitzler, chief of the German General Staff, stands before Hitler with urgent intelligence. The Soviet Union has encircled the German Sixth Army. 300,000 soldiers trapped in a shrinking pocket. Zeitzler presents the military solution: immediate breakout to the west while forces remain strong enough to fight through Soviet lines. Every senior Wehrmacht officer agrees. The decision is obvious. Hitler listens. Then delivers his answer in 2 words: the army stays. No retreat. No withdrawal. Stand and fight. Zeitzler protests: the army will be destroyed. Hitler interrupts: I have decided. The discussion ends. Within 10 weeks, the Sixth Army ceases to exist. This is not an isolated incident. Between 1939 and 1945, Adolf Hitler personally overrules his senior military commanders on operational and strategic decisions at least 137 documented times. The pattern begins with small tactical interventions and escalates to catastrophic strategic blunders. Hitler countermands withdrawal orders, halts offensives at critical moments, diverts forces from decisive battles, and refuses to accept military reality when it contradicts his ideological beliefs. His generals, many among the most professionally competent military minds in Europe, watch helplessly as Hitler's interference destroys their carefully planned operations. The cumulative result: Germany loses battles it might have won, suffers casualties it could have avoided, and transforms tactical setbacks into strategic disasters. This is the story of how one man's refusal to trust his military professionals helped lose World War II. Adolf Hitler becomes supreme commander of the German armed forces, Wehrmacht, in 1938. After forcing the resignation of War Minister Werner von Blomberg and Army Commander Werner von Fritsch, this centralizes all military authority under Hitler personally. The traditional Prussian military system featured professional autonomy. Generals planned and executed operations based on military necessity. Hitler eliminates this independence. The new command structure flows directly from Hitler to the service branches: Oberkommando des Heers, Army; Oberkommando der Kriegsmarine, Navy; and Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, Air Force. Strategic decisions require Hitler's personal approval. Operational plans need Hitler's authorization. Even tactical deployments at division level eventually require Führer permission. This creates a fundamental conflict: professional military officers trained in warfare versus a dictator with no formal military education making operational decisions based on political ideology and personal intuition. Hitler's distrust of his generals has multiple sources. First, class resentment. Hitler, a former corporal from Austria, commands aristocratic Prussian officers who privately consider him an upstart. Second, ideological conflict. Wehrmacht officers think in terms of military objectives while Hitler thinks in terms of ideological imperatives. Third, historical paranoia. Hitler believes Germany lost World War I because generals betrayed the nation through premature armistice. He is determined that Wehrmacht commanders will not stab Germany in the back again. Fourth, early success syndrome. Hitler's political instincts during the 1930s repeatedly prove correct when professional advisors counsel caution. Remilitarization of the Rhineland, annexation of Austria, occupation of Czechoslovakia. Hitler overrules conservative military advice and achieves bloodless victories. This reinforces his belief that generals are too cautious and that his intuition surpasses their professional judgment. The pattern of interference begins subtly during the invasion of Poland in September 1939. but accelerates during the Battle of France in May-June 1940. On May 24, 1940, German panzer divisions have surrounded the British Expeditionary Force and French First Army at Dunkirk. Generaloberst Gerd von Rundstedt commands Army Group A, the force that executed the breakthrough. General Admiral Walther von Brauchitsch, Commander-in-Chief of the Army, and Franz Halder, Chief of the General Staff, plan to immediately attack and destroy the trapped Allied forces. Then Hitler intervenes. The Halt Order. Hitler personally orders panzers to stop advancing and allow the Luftwaffe to finish the encircled enemy. Guderian and other panzer commanders protest furiously. 3 days of delays allow 338,000 British and French troops to evacuate. German generals argue this decision extends the war by years. Britain remains in the fight with an army that should have been destroyed. Hitler dismisses their concerns. The Führer has spoken. But what makes this pattern truly dangerous is that Hitler sometimes makes correct decisions early in the war, reinforcing his dangerous confidence. During the planning for Fallgelb Case Yellow, the invasion of France, the German General Staff initially proposes a conservative plan, attack through Belgium similar to World War I's Schlieffen Plan. Hitler rejects this and embraces Erich von Manstein's radical alternative, concentrated panzer thrust through the Ardennes forest to split Allied armies. Professional officers consider this too risky. Hitler insists. The Manstein plan works brilliantly. France falls in 6 weeks. This success is catastrophic for Hitler's relationship with his generals because it confirms Hitler's belief that his judgment exceeds professional military advice. When Hitler later makes disastrous decisions, he references France. "I was right about the Ardennes when you were all wrong." By 1941, the command dysfunction is systemic. Hitler maintains direct control through the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, Armed Forces High Command run by yes-men Generalfeldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel and Generaloberst Alfred Jodl. Keitel is so submissive that officers nickname him Lackeytel, a pun on lakai, lackey. Professional officers route requests through OKW, where Hitler personally reviews and approves tactical decisions that should be made by field commanders. The German military, considered the world's most professionally competent in 1939, increasingly functions as an extension of Hitler's personal will rather than an independent professional organization. The interference pattern escalates dramatically during Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union beginning June 22, 1941. The General Staff, led by Franz Halder, plans a concentrated thrust toward Moscow, destroy the Soviet government and military command structure in a single decisive campaign. Hitler repeatedly diverts forces to secondary objectives. In August 1941, as German forces approach Moscow, Hitler orders Army Group Center, the strongest formation, to redirect south toward Kiev and the Ukrainian industrial areas. Halder protests vehemently. Fedor von Bock, commanding Army Group Center, argues that Moscow is within reach and the campaign could end in 1941. Hitler responds with a 12-page memorandum explaining why economic targets matter more than military objectives. The diversion succeeds tactically. Germany captures 650,000 Soviet prisoners at Kiev, but costs 6 weeks. The drive toward Moscow resumes in October. Then autumn rains arrive, turning roads to impassable mud. Then winter. December 1941. German forces reach the outskirts of Moscow and temperatures dropping to -35°C. Equipment fails. Soldiers lack winter clothing because Hitler insisted the campaign would end before winter. The Soviet Union counterattacks with fresh Siberian divisions. Bach requests permission to withdraw to defensible winter positions. Hitler refuses, hold every meter of ground. Bach is relieved of command. General Feldmarschall Walther von Brauchitsch, Army Commander-in-Chief, suffers a heart attack after Hitler blames him for the failure. Hitler assumes personal command of the army, making himself simultaneously head of state, supreme commander of armed forces, and army field commander. Professional officers recognize the disaster unfolding. Hitler now directly controls tactical operations across the entire Eastern Front, a front 2,000 kilometers long with 3 million German soldiers. The Winter Crisis of 1941. -42 establishes Hitler's most catastrophic command principle, Haltebefehl, the Standfast Order. German forces will never voluntarily surrender territory. No tactical withdrawals. No strategic retreats. Every position must be held to the last man. Hitler believes this prevented complete collapse in December 1941, and becomes convinced that willpower can substitute for tactical flexibility. Professional officers recognize this as militarily insane. Armies need tactical mobility to avoid encirclement and preserve fighting strength. But Hitler overrules every withdrawal request. The result: German units are repeatedly encircled and destroyed when mobile defense might have preserved them. The pattern repeats across the Eastern Front throughout 1942 and 1943. But what the Germans don't know yet makes this disaster even worse. Stalin, facing his own military crisis in 1941, actually considers Hitler's Standfast orders a gift to the Red Army. Soviet commanders later write that German refusal to withdraw allows Soviet forces to encircle and destroy German units that could have escaped. Hitler's rigid command style turns tactical setbacks into strategic catastrophes. Yet Hitler never acknowledges the pattern. Each encirclement is explained away: insufficient willpower, traitorous commanders, sabotage, never Hitler's interference. Summer 1942. Germany launches Case Blue, the offensive towards Stalingrad and the Caucasus oil fields. The plan calls for sequential objectives: first secure the Don River flank, then drive south into the Caucasus. Hitler modifies the plan mid-offensive, ordering simultaneous drives toward both Stalingrad and the Caucasus. Halder protests that this splits German forces between two diverging axes of advance, violating the fundamental principle of concentration of force. Hitler dismisses the objection. On September 24, 1942, after months of mounting tension over Hitler's operational interference, Halder is relieved as Chief of General Staff. His replacement, General Oberst Kurt Zeitzler, chosen primarily for loyalty. The message to Wehrmacht officers is clear: professional military judgment that contradicts Hitler's decisions is grounds for dismissal. The Stalingrad operation exemplifies Hitler's interference at every level. General der Panzertruppe Friedrich Paulus commands the 6th Army, the main force attacking Stalingrad. Paulus is a methodical staff officer, not an aggressive field commander. He requests specific reinforcements and supply allocations to support the urban battle. Hitler micromanages from 2,000 kilometers away, reallocating units based on map positions rather than battlefield realities. Paulus requests permission to bypass Stalingrad and continue east to more defensible terrain. Hitler refuses. Stalingrad must be captured because it bears Stalin's name, an ideological rather than military priority. By November 1942, German forces are exhausted, overextended, and vulnerable. Soviet intelligence identifies the weakness. Romanian and Italian armies defending the flanks north and south of Stalingrad lack adequate anti-tank weapons. Operation Uranus, the Soviet counteroffensive, will strike these weak points and encircle the Germans in Stalingrad itself. November 19, 1942. The Soviet counteroffensive begins exactly as Soviet planning intended. Within 4 days, 6 Soviet armies smash through Romanian positions north and south of Stalingrad and link up west of the city. The entire German 6th Army, 22 divisions, approximately 300,000 soldiers, is encircled. This is where Zeitzler requests the breakout on November 23. Military logic is unambiguous: break out immediately while forces retain strength and cohesion, even if this means temporarily abandoning Stalingrad. Every Wehrmacht officer with Eastern Front experience recognizes the danger of encirclement. Hitler's response transforms tactical defeat into strategic catastrophe. The Standfast Order dooms the Sixth Army. But Hitler doesn't just order them to stand, he promises relief. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring assures Hitler that the Luftwaffe can supply the encircled army by air, 500 tons of supplies daily. Luftwaffe logistics officers know this is impossible. The Luftwaffe lacks sufficient aircraft, the weather is deteriorating, Soviet air defense is strengthening, and air bases are inadequate. They tell Göring. Göring tells Hitler what Hitler wants to hear. General Feldmarschall Erich von Manstein is appointed to command a relief operation, Operation Winter Storm. Manstein, Germany's most capable operational commander, assembles forces and attacks towards Stalingrad on December 12. By December 19, Manstein's spearhead reaches within 48 kilometers of the Stalingrad pocket. Manstein requests Paulus breakout to meet the relief force. Hitler refuses to authorize breakout. The Standfast Order remains in effect. Manstein's relief force, increasingly outnumbered, is forced to withdraw. The Stalingrad pocket slowly starves. At this exact moment, 1,000 kilometers northwest, Hitler makes another catastrophic intervention. Soviet forces launch Operation Little Saturn, an offensive threatening to encircle Army Group Dawn, Manstein's entire command. Manstein urgently requests permission to withdraw from the Caucasus, a strategic retreat to shorten defensive lines and free reserves. Hitler refuses. Every meter of Soviet territory must be held. The Caucasus offensive has ideological importance. Germany needs the oil. Never mind that German forces cannot hold the Caucasus if their supply lines are cut. Hitler overrules Manstein, considered the Wehrmacht's finest strategic mind, and orders positions held. Only in January 1943. When catastrophe is imminent, does Hitler grudgingly authorize piecemeal withdrawals? By then, the strategic situation has deteriorated beyond recovery. The Stalingrad pocket continues shrinking through December and January. Airlift delivers perhaps 100 to 120 tons daily versus the required 500 tons. Soldiers starve. Wounded freeze. Ammunition runs low. Paulus sends increasingly desperate messages to Hitler requesting either relief or authorization to surrender. Hitler responds by promoting Paulus to General Feldmarschall on January 30, 1943. The implication being that no German field marshal has ever surrendered. The gesture is meaningless. On February 2, 1943. The last German units in Stalingrad surrender. Approximately 110,000 German soldiers enter Soviet captivity. Only 6,000 will survive to return to Germany after the war. An entire army destroyed not primarily by Soviet military superiority, but by Hitler's refusal to authorize withdrawal when military logic demanded it. The Stalingrad catastrophe fails to change Hitler's command style. Instead, it intensifies. Hitler's explanation for defeat is that generals lacked sufficient fanaticism, that Paulus should have committed suicide rather than surrender, that the Sixth Army failed him. Never that Hitler's standfast order created the disaster. This psychological denial becomes a pattern. Every German defeat results from insufficient willpower or treasonous commanders, never from Hitler's operational interference. The consequence, Hitler micromanages even more aggressively, trusting his generals even less, overruling their professional judgment more frequently. Spring 1943. Germany plans Operation Citadel, the offensive against the Kursk salient. The General Staff wants to attack in May immediately after the spring mud dries, before Soviet defenses strengthen. Hitler repeatedly delays, demanding more Tiger and Panther tanks, more preparation, more reserves. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Panzer Troops, argues that every week of delay allows Soviet forces to fortify the salient. Hitler dismisses the concerns. The offensive finally launches July 5, 1943. 2 months late. By then, Soviet forces have constructed 8 defensive belts up to 250 kilometers deep with extensive minefields, anti-tank positions, and reserves. The Germans attack into the most heavily fortified position in military history. After 1 week of grinding attrition with negligible gains, Hitler cancels the offensive. Germany has lost the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front permanently. Professional officers later argue that early execution in May might have succeeded. Hitler's delay transformed potential breakthrough into costly defeat. But the interference extends beyond major strategic decisions. Hitler increasingly micromanages tactical details that should be left to field commanders. In June 1944, with Allied invasion of France imminent, Rommel commands Army Group B defending the Channel coast. Rommel wants to position panzer reserves close to the invasion beaches, within hours striking distance, to counterattack immediately and destroy the invasion before it consolidates. Rundstedt, commanding OB West, prefers mobile defense in depth. The professional debate is legitimate. Hitler's solution: he personally controls the panzer reserves. On D-Day, June 6, 1944. Hitler is asleep at the Berghof. His staff refuses to wake him before 10 a.m. per standing orders. Panzer divisions that could attack the invasion beaches in the critical first hours sit idle waiting for Hitler's authorization. When Hitler wakes and authorizes deployment at 4 p.m., 156,000 Allied soldiers are already ashore. The moment for decisive counterattack has passed. A professional field commander with authority to act immediately might have changed D-Day's outcome. Hitler's personal control of operational reserves created fatal delay. The pattern repeats across every theater. In North Africa, Rommel repeatedly requests permission to withdraw to more defensible positions as Allied numerical superiority grows overwhelming. Hitler refuses every request, hold current positions regardless of tactical situation. This inflexibility leads directly to the destruction of Panzer Army Africa in Tunisia, May 1943. 250,000 German and Italian soldiers captured because Hitler forbade timely withdrawal. In Italy, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring wants to conduct mobile defense, trading space for time. Hitler insists on rigid defense of every position. The result: higher German casualties and progressive attrition of forces that could be preserved through tactical flexibility. At this exact moment, mid-1944, Hitler's interference reaches almost pathological levels. He controls not just army-level operations, but division movements, regimental deployments, even battalion positions. German commanders on the Eastern Front report that requests for tactical withdrawals of 5 to 10 kilometers require Hitler's personal approval, a process taking 24 to 48 hours while Soviet attacks unfold in real time. This removes all tactical flexibility from frontline commanders. A Soviet breakthrough develops. German commanders see the danger and want to pull back to avoid encirclement. They request permission. The request goes up the chain of command to OKW, to Hitler's headquarters, where Hitler studies maps and makes decisions based on positions he sees on paper rather than battlefield reality. By the time authorization comes, if it comes, the tactical situation has changed and the proposed response is obsolete. German units are repeatedly encircled and destroyed in circumstances where mobile defense could have preserved them. Three factors now converge to seal Germany's fate: overwhelming Allied material superiority that Germany cannot match, multi-front war that stretches German resources beyond sustainability, and command paralysis from Hitler's micromanagement that prevents Germany from using its remaining advantages in tactical flexibility and professional competence. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, who Hitler appoints Chief of General Staff in July 1944, later writes, Hitler was convinced of his own military genius. He refused to accept advice and insisted on making every decision personally. The result was that our armies lost the flexibility that had been their greatest strength. We could no longer maneuver because Hitler forbade maneuver. We became a rigid defensive wall that the Allies simply battered down through material superiority. July 20, 1944. A group of Wehrmacht officers attempts to assassinate Hitler with a bomb at Rassenburg headquarters. The plot fails. Hitler survives. His response intensifies the command dysfunction. He trusts Wehrmacht officers even less. The traditional military salute is replaced with the Nazi salute. Political officers from the SS increasingly oversee military units. Hitler makes operational decisions based not on military merit, but on perceived political loyalty. The remaining professional officers recognize the war is lost, but lack authority to conduct the strategic withdrawals that might preserve German forces for prolonged defense. Every retreat requires Hitler's authorization. Hitler authorizes retreats only when positions are already collapsing. The result: German armies are systematically destroyed in place rather than conducting fighting withdrawals. Winter 1944. -45. Soviet offensive smash through German defenses across the Eastern Front. German commanders request permission to withdraw to defensible positions along major rivers, the Vistula, the Oder. Hitler refuses. Hold current positions. German units are encircled, bypassed, and destroyed. Those forces might have conducted effective defense behind river barriers. Instead, they are annihilated in forward positions because Hitler forbids retreat. On the Western Front, German commanders recognize that the Rhine River offers Germany's last defensible position. They request permission to withdraw behind the Rhine, demolish bridges, and force the Allies to conduct opposed river crossings. Hitler refuses. Defend west of the Rhine. The result: Allied forces capture Rhine bridges intact at Remagen and cross into Germany's industrial heartland with minimal resistance. Every professional officer recognizes these decisions are militarily insane. None can overrule the Führer. The cumulative cost of Hitler's micromanagement is difficult to calculate precisely, but undeniably enormous. Military historians identify specific instances where Hitler's interference transformed tactical setbacks into strategic disasters. Stalingrad. 300,000 casualties, Tunisia. 250,000 casualties, multiple smaller encirclements on the Eastern Front, hundreds of thousands more, the failure to evacuate Army Group North from the Courland pocket. 200,000 soldiers uselessly trapped, and countless smaller operational failures where timely withdrawal could have preserved forces for later battles. The human cost: hundreds of thousands of German soldiers killed, wounded, or captured in circumstances where professional military judgment could have saved them. Beyond casualties, Hitler's command paralysis prevented Germany from leveraging its remaining advantages in tactical skill and operational flexibility. The strategic consequences extend beyond individual battles. By 1944, Germany faces overwhelming Allied material superiority on all fronts. Germany's only remaining advantage is tactical and operational skill, the ability of German commanders to maneuver forces effectively, conduct fighting withdrawals, and trade space for time while inflicting disproportionate casualties on attacking forces. Hitler's micromanagement eliminates this advantage. German armies become rigid defensive formations locked in place by Hitler's standfast orders. They cannot maneuver, cannot conduct elastic defense, cannot preserve combat power through tactical withdrawals. The Allies simply batter through German positions with overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority. Germany's professional military skill, which might have prolonged the war significantly through mobile defense, is nullified by Hitler's interference. Post-war testimony from surviving German generals is remarkably consistent. General Feldmarschall Erich von Manstein writes in his memoirs, Hitler's insistence on holding every meter of ground was militarily disastrous. Had we been permitted to conduct mobile defense, trading territory for time while preserving our forces, the Soviet advance could have been slowed significantly. Instead, we lost armies in encirclements that served no strategic purpose. Guderian writes, the tragedy is that Germany possessed superb military commanders and soldiers. But we were shackled by a command system where every decision required approval from a dictator 2,000 kilometers from the battlefield who refused to accept military reality. General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring testifies at Nuremberg, the Führer's orders were often militarily impossible. But we had no authority to modify them based on battlefield conditions. The alternative history question is inevitable. Could Germany have won World War II with professional military leadership? The consensus among historians is no. Germany's resource base and strategic situation made ultimate defeat likely by 1943. But could professional military leadership have prolonged the war significantly? Almost certainly yes. British historian John Keegan writes, Hitler's operational interference accelerated Germany's defeat by 12 to 18 months. With professional military command making tactical decisions, Germany could have conducted more effective mobile defense that would have made Allied advances far more costly and time-consuming. The practical difference, potentially hundreds of thousands of additional Allied casualties in 1 to 2 more years of war. From a humanitarian perspective, Hitler's incompetent micromanagement ironically shortened the war and reduced total casualties by accelerating Germany's military collapse. The modern military establishment studies Hitler's command failures as a comprehensive case study in civil-military relations gone catastrophically wrong. The United States military's principle of civilian control balanced with professional military autonomy exists partly as a reaction to Hitler's example. NATO doctrine emphasizes clear delineation between political objectives, set by civilian leadership, and military operations, planned and executed by professional officers. The lesson: political leaders must set strategic goals and constraints, but must not micromanage tactical and operational decisions they lack expertise to make. This principle, obvious in hindsight, emerged partly from analysis of Hitler's disastrous command style. But what makes Hitler's micromanagement uniquely catastrophic is not just the military failures, but the psychological mechanism that prevented correction. Every time Hitler's interference caused disaster, he blamed subordinates rather than acknowledging his own errors. This created a feedback loop: bad decision, disaster, blame generals, trust generals, less interfere, more, worse decisions. The system had no self-correction mechanism. Professional military officers recognized the pattern, but lacked authority to override Hitler. The few who tried, like Halder, were dismissed. The rest either resigned themselves to following impossible orders or participated in the July 20th plot and were executed. By 1945, the senior Wehrmacht leadership consisted primarily of officers selected for political loyalty rather than professional competence. Germany fought the final year of the war with a command structure designed for failure. Remember Kurt Zeitzler standing before Hitler on November 23, 1942, requesting authorization for the Sixth Army to break out of Stalingrad. Remember Hitler's two-word response that doomed 300,000 soldiers. The army stays. That moment exemplifies the pattern: professional military judgment offering the correct solution, Hitler overruling based on ideological conviction or personal pride, catastrophe following inevitably. This pattern repeated at least 137 documented times across 6 years of war. Not every intervention caused disaster. Some of Hitler's decisions proved correct, particularly early in the war. But the cumulative effect was devastating. Germany's professional military competence, potentially its greatest advantage, was systematically nullified by a dictator who trusted his intuition over his generals' expertise. The statistical evidence is clear. Germany suffered approximately 5.3 million military deaths in World War II. What percentage resulted directly from Hitler's operational interference versus inevitable consequences of a war Germany was likely to lose? Historians estimate that Hitler's most catastrophic command failures, Stalingrad, Tunisia, Courland, multiple smaller encirclements, and the failure to conduct timely strategic withdrawals, cost Germany 800,000 to 1.2 million. Additional casualties beyond what professional military leadership would have suffered. These soldiers died not primarily because Allied forces defeated them militarily, but because Hitler's orders placed them in tactically impossible situations and then forbade the withdrawals that could have saved them. British military historian Anthony Beevor writes, Hitler's military micromanagement represents perhaps the most comprehensive example in history of how a single leader's operational incompetence can systematically destroy a professional military establishment. The Wehrmacht entered World War II as arguably the world's most tactically proficient army. It ended the war shattered not just by Allied material superiority, but by 6 years of command dysfunction that eliminated Germany's advantages. Today, every major military academy teaches Hitler's command failures as the definitive case study in dysfunctional civil-military relations. At West Point, the United States Military Academy, Hitler's interference at Stalingrad is analyzed alongside the principle of mission command, giving subordinate commanders clear objectives, but trusting their professional judgment on execution. At Sandhurst, the British equivalent, officer candidates study the contrast between Hitler's micromanagement and Churchill's approach, which set political objectives, but deferred to professional military leaders on operational decisions. At the German Bundeswehrführungsakademie, officers examine how democratic oversight prevents the concentration of military authority that enabled Hitler's catastrophic interference. The lesson transcends World War II history. When political leaders override professional military judgment on operational matters they lack expertise to evaluate, catastrophe follows. This principle remains relevant in contemporary conflicts where political leaders face the temptation to micromanage military operations in real time. Hitler's legacy in military education is this warning: expertise matters, professional judgment exists for reasons, and intuition is no substitute for competence when lives hang in the balance.